Pat yourself on the back because you are right here, right now, for a reason. Welcome to the On Purpose podcast, where together we will empower ourselves and others to live lives with more passion and purpose. How you doing this morning, Jared?
I'm fantastic, Ali. How are you, my friend?
Fantastic as well and ready to rock.
Yeah, it's good. It's kind of fun. We're on a different day than normal for our recording schedule to allow for us both to travel a little bit and be involved in some other projects. So it's kind of a different feel for us. But one thing that's consistent, it's still cold as hell in here.
Yeah, always freezing, man. Always freezing. We got a cold community
Oh my goodness.
in the Avery building because it's all controlled by the same one. And speaking of community, we're just going to touch very briefly on our own purposeful practice. What did you find out with reviewing your practice for last week's episode of The Value of Community, Jared?
I just love community. Yesterday was a perfect example. I was out supporting my wife and her business, Essentially Abundant, we had a booth or working a booth at a yoga festival and just getting out and talking to people and meeting new folks and sharing stories and hearing their passions and what their purpose is. And I can't tell you guys enough the importance of just getting out and being around other people and learning their stories. So for me, it's just it's a big piece of what I do, and I can tell you I feel different on the days that I'm out and engaged with people versus those days where I'm kind of by myself just working on tasks the whole time. So I really enjoy just being around people.
Yeah.
What about you?
Definitely, definitely. Well, I had identified my primary communities, obviously career, cannabis community, Old Town, Fort Collins, trials,
Yeah.
Toastmasters. So it was really good and for me to realize like, wow, I do have quite a few communities. And even though I receive a lot from them all, I realize that I'm always trying to contribute. And I do believe that I am more of a giver than a taker from most of the communities that I'm involved in. And it feels really good. It feels really good to be present within those communities. And especially when there's a small pause or a small time where maybe I'm traveling or out of town, then those communities miss me. It's nice to go back to the
Yeah.
gym and guys be like, where you been? And it's only been like a week of not going.
Sure, and I think that's important, what you said there, and I agree wholeheartedly, is the communities in which you give, you will feel better about. And it's weird because when you give, you generally get more in return. So it's nice to be in places where you know what you give is valued and that people miss it when it's not there. But that only comes with being heavily invested and really giving your time to the community and expecting nothing in return. Just give for the sake of giving.
Yep.
So
Yep.
good
Definitely.
stuff. Where so it's interesting. As we took inventory of our communities and we looked at our communities, one of the things we're going to notice is the communities all have a different feel, right? They have a different vibe. And people talk about that all the time. I hear it a lot at the gym, right? Like the gym just has a different feeling. When you're in different social networks, it has a different vibe, a different way of treating each other. And that's what we want to get into today is every community has a different, what we would call culture. So we want to spend time talking about today is what is culture and how do we go about impacting culture?
Yeah.
So is there, for you, Ali, you're a very successful entrepreneur right now. You got multiple businesses that you're running that both have distinct feels. How conscious are you about your culture? And what would you say, like, how would you even define, like, what would you tell our listeners, what does culture mean to you and how do you kind of use it in your company?
Well, I pulled out my phone because I was curious, and I haven't looked it up yet, but to see what the Google definition
Yeah.
is. So here in a bit, I'll check and see what Google says about culture. But for me, culture is the consistent feeling and, like you said, vibe of your environment that you and your community create. So I think culture really ties back into community. I know that in my business, B Nails, we do have a culture, and we consistently, since we're a smaller team, we do have to continuously talk about what are our core values, right? What is our culture? Are we executing on what we tend to execute on? Because especially in the workplace, I feel that culture can kind of be something that's forgotten or put to the wayside because you're so focused on the task. But I will say that a place where the culture is very defined, one of my communities is our Toastmasters Club. Fort Collins Toastmasters Club 375 meets 6:30 p.m. on Tuesdays if you're ever interested. We have a culture of people who are coming together, share a common goal of improving their public speaking leadership skills, and a culture of vulnerability. People will talk about really private things, and we've cultivated that over time. So for me, culture is an environment, a feeling, a vibration in an environment that is cultivated in from the people in your community over time.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
What
I
about for
agree.
you?
Yeah, I 100% agree. Culture is how you feel when you're around a certain group of people, whether you're around a business, when you're inside their storefront. It's how you feel. Do you feel valued? Do you feel important? Do you feel like your time is special there? Whether it's your workplace, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a business owner, it's how you make people feel. And too many, I see this all the time in businesses, and I definitely saw it in my law enforcement career. Too many organizations want to put up a fancy poster. They go out and buy this inspirational poster of some guy climbing some mountains, and it has the values of the company and the mission statement and the culture. And then their practices don't do anything remotely close to what's on the poster.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what poster you're talking
You know
about
what I
too.
mean?
Yeah.
So your culture is, what do you do? Not what do you say, not what do you tell people you're going to do, but how do you do it? And so what you do is how people feel. So you can have all the greatest mission statements in the world, but if you don't practice it and you don't do it daily, that's not your culture. Your culture is whatever your practices are. So to me, culture is, how do I feel when I'm around something? How do I feel when I'm involved? And then it's created by the practices, not by the spoken word.
Amen. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Let's take a look at the Google definition here. So, Google culture is a noun, the arts and other manifestation of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. And then they have another definition, the customs, arts, social institution, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. So I think that really ties into your point of it's what you're actually
Right.
doing, what you have actually manifested and
Yep.
created. Um,
It's interesting, right? So having a gym, having this podcast, coaching law enforcement officers, all of those, right? B nails, they all have different cultures. But for me, they're all very consistent in that when I'm engaged with people, when people come through the doors at the gym, when they listen to the podcast, if they're at one of my classes, they all have to feel important. They all have to feel valued, and they have to know that we are there to serve them, not to take from them. So it's a very conscious deployment to make sure we meet that need for all of our customers, even though they're three distinctly different businesses, right? And that's one of the things I want people to understand is culture is happening every day. If you're a business owner listening to us and you're not talking about your culture, you're not evaluating your culture, you're not consciously promoting the culture you want, it's being trained by not doing it. Right? Culture never stays the same. It's always in flux. It's either changing and improving or it's degrading. And here's the example I was thinking about yours is Toastmasters. Right? You have the number one fear for most people in the world is public speaking. Toastmasters is designed to address that. So you have people coming in, want to address a fear, volunteering to sign up, speaking about vulnerable stuff. The culture is they're allowed to do that because over time, consistently, It's been open to allow that.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's say that's the culture, but you have a change in leadership. And the change in leadership doesn't really pay attention to the culture. And now all of a sudden you get one new member who inappropriately laughs at somebody's vulnerable story, who listens to a story and then bashes them in a small social circle afterwards or talks crap about them. If that's not fixed, even though your culture was openness and vulnerability, and the poster still says it, and all the mission statements still say it, if that new behavior isn't addressed, your culture shifted,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a thing that happens to many businesses and many, honestly, relationships over time. It's not a huge, like, culture doesn't change today 180 degrees. It's small slides over the scale where culture isn't reinforced of what we want, and we move away from it.
Yeah.
So one person comes in and now you tell a vulnerable story and I listen, and I'm new and I'm not sure on the culture. So I go to my social group and I talk and I'm like, Lee's story, man, I can't believe he did that. I would never do that. And those two people now start to ally with me. And every time somebody speaks, we go off to our group and we start to talk. And then the next new guy comes in and we grab him real quick and we start bashing on them. Now your culture shifted.
Yeah. Culture shift.
Because nobody reinforced culture. And we take it for granted, right? Culture is conscious every day. How am I going to treat you? How am I going to make sure you feel special, you feel valued, that our time is important? And if I don't do that, over time, the culture shifts.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's interesting that culture is just such a all-encompassing word, right? You can have different cultures geographically,
Yep.
right? Ethnically, and then there's company culture, organizational culture. For our listeners, what do you think is a way to identify your personal culture? Because that's something that I don't think a lot of people speak about or use that word in that sense, right? Maybe they'll say like my culture, as in, for me, the Hispanic culture
Heritage.
side, or right, your
Yeah.
heritage type of culture. But now that I'm thinking about the different groups and communities that I'm involved in, typically a lot of these organizations will have some similarities for their culture, right? Like Toastmasters and Trials MMA, very different. You won't find the same people, but there's a lot of tie-ins in vulnerability.
Yeah,
You got to be
absolutely.
vulnerable getting out there on the mats. There's no lying on the mats about whether you've been trained or not. It's going to
Yeah.
show up. Same thing when you're giving a speech. Spotlight on you. You got to execute. So how do you think we can think about? Do you think that there's such thing as like this is your personal
Yeah.
culture?
I think it goes back to the episode about your authentic self, right? So your example couldn't be more perfect.
Mm-hmm.
On paper, mission, values, results, Toastmasters and Trials couldn't be more different, right? One is about going up and public speaking, so educating, influencing, inspiring through your words, through your behavior, through your presentation. The other is about learning mixed martial arts. For some, it's going to be fighting in a cage, which could hurt people. So the words of what they're doing are completely different, but the behaviors are exactly the same, right? You have to be humble to go to either. You have to admit you don't know everything to go to either. You will learn at both places. You will lose at both places. You will stumble. You will make mistakes. You will be vulnerable. You will be rebuilt. You'll be coached. You'll perform. You'll start to believe in yourself. You'll have success. Which goes back to exactly what I said. Culture is not the words of what you're after. It's the behaviors of what you do. So culturally, they're exactly the same.
No, I love that. I agree. So what do we do to create culture?
Yep.
For our listeners out there, let's say we're trying to start a new group, start an organization, and to start a podcast, whatever it is. The On Purpose podcast, we have our own culture here with the On Purpose community. What do we do to create culture?
I think you have to know what it is you're really wanting to do with it? Right? What is the purpose? And not the purpose to, like I said, put up on some motivational poster in the restroom so every time you go to the bathroom you see the guy climbing the mountain, but as soon as you leave
That
nobody
guy.
practices it. Right? And I hope he climbed the mountain. I mean, good for him, but I'm kind of irritated seeing him in every restroom I go in. You have to know what you're after. So all the groups, I'll tell you, for me, all the groups I'm involved in revolve around coaching and making other people better. Right? So that's the culture. So then for me, I always have to be conscious of, okay, the culture of what I'm involved in means I have to give more than I take. And it means people should see results by being associated with us. So I'm always evaluating, okay, are we making people better, or have we gotten stagnant? Am I learning enough to continue to share and grow, or am I doing what I've already done? So the culture there becomes learning and growing and sharing. So, but it starts with a good identity of what it is you want to get done, right? And what is the end goal? And I love tangible goals. I love numbers and hitting metrics, because that is how you know if you're on the right path. But that's not the most important thing to me. The most important thing to me is the people involved, because that's truly where your culture is, right? It's that feel. So I think for a lot of people, this can tie back to, what communities you're involved in, your authentic self. Do you align with the culture? Because some cultures of communities are hate, right? There's groups out there that their culture is hate, separation, division, and they're groups. Like, you can choose to join that. Or do you choose a group that's about love, compassion, growth? You have the choice. So I think you have to be consciously evaluating, like, what is the group I'm in and what is the culture? Do I feel empowered and uplifted around this group, or do I feel separated, isolated, doubtful? So I'm extremely conscientious and always evaluating, how are people feeling? The gym is probably the most tangible example for me, because we get people of all walks of life coming through the doors. Really fit, wanting to get more fit, way out of shape, just trying to get a baseline of fitness. And I want people to, when they come through, there's a place for everybody in the family. So we have to make sure we convey that, make sure we know to them that it's possible, make sure we explain to them how it's going to work for them. And I think too many times we get caught up in just being somewhere without consciously thinking, like, why am I here? And does this align with what I'm trying to get out of life, where I want to be in life? Or is it something that I just do blindly, or I do because I've always done it, but it no longer serves me?
Do you have any specific stories? And I'm trying to, as I'm asking you this, I'm trying to think of mine, to where you were really impacted by a new culture
Yeah, for sure.
that you experienced?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly. And it's an interesting one, because I think it's parlaying into the troubles we see around the country right now. And for all my law enforcement friends out there, and you may remember this, but for community members, I'll tell you, this is just my opinion, but as a policeman, I saw a drastic shift here, is when I first got into policing in the late 90s, we were very much about being involved in the community, going to community, like, they wanted that community policing feel. It was a very popular buzzword at the time. It was what we were after. And then about 2006, 2007, somewhere in there, we had a shift in the culture where everything became data-driven. There was a new term called data-driven policing. I think it was out of New York. They had something called CompStat. And basically, like, everything every cop did all day long generated stats. And, like, all the commanders were called to the room to justify, why is crime up over here and down over here, and what stat is this? And you were kind of ostracized or praised because your statistical data either was good or bad. Well, which is fine, right? Because you need to have a balance of stats. But what happened was, we started in policing prioritizing stats over people, which then started to create a separation, right? Because if I'm out on a call and I spend an hour talking to a family, counseling about a young person and helping them because I've experience raising kids. Here's some ideas. That's one call for an hour. If my partner doesn't talk well with people, doesn't interact well with people, but he writes 4 speeding tickets in an hour, the family I'm with feels valued. They feel like they were heard. They feel served. The 4 people he wrote tickets to, he may have treated them very professionally, and they'll slow down for a little bit, but they're not generally like, oh, this happy about that. So at the end of the night, but what does it look like? Like I served the community, so did the other person, but it's a different way. At the end of the night, this person stat-wise has 4 tickets. I have 0. So who's more efficient? Who's being praised for work? Well, this guy, because he had something tangible. Whereas greater impact was me, right? Spending time with the family, changing a teenager's life. And over years, we really started getting into data and policing, and we lost the people side of it. So then the community and police started drifting apart because the police are after stats because internally that's what they're being praised for. Meanwhile, the community's starting to suffer and starting to want more because what do? They want your time. They want your problem solving. They want to know their call is important because for a lot of people, they're going to call the cops once or twice their entire life. So they want the time. But as a policeman, I'm literally going on calls all day for 10 hours every day, 4 days a week for my whole career. And we got imbalanced. And then, you look today, you have communities and police that are still, now they're trying to repair the bridges. And how are they doing that? Coffee with the chief, community outreach. Now all of a sudden we realize, wait a second, we had drifted so much to data that we lost the relationship piece. And, I've spoke about that in professional law enforcement groups as well, as just the contradiction of what we've created unintentionally by focusing on numbers and forgetting that our actual business model is all about people.
That's a great example. So with us talking about culture and having a lot of different definitions, our definitions were a little bit different. Google's definition is a little bit different. Why should we even care about culture, right? Like what is the value of being aware of culture?
That's interesting. I would say to me, the value of being aware of culture is my time. Right? If I'm in groups where I don't align with their culture, if I'm around people that don't align with how I want to feel, I just wasted my time. And at the end of the day, we have 24 hours. I prefer to spend the majority of my time around people that make me feel good, around supporting businesses that make me feel good, sharing my cultural drive, my cultural belief that we can make this world better. Not spending my time around people that want to separate others and continue to point out all the ways we're different and all the negativity in the world. So it's simple for me. It goes back to where do I get to spend my time, and I'm in charge of my time, and I'm going to be purposefully aware. And another thing that I think about a lot is small business. If you walk into a small business, especially like coffee shops, because they're all the rage here in Colorado, right? You can get coffee anywhere. You can go to 7-Eleven and get coffee much cheaper than you can at your local coffee shop. But why do you choose to go to the coffee shop when the lines are longer, there's no place to sit, over a 7-Eleven when you can walk in and out in 20 seconds? Well, you choose it because of the way you're treated, the way you feel when you come in the doors. It's culture. But now, if this local coffee shop continues to get bigger and bigger and has more success, and all their employee training goes to making the drinks as quick as you can, turning over the line as fast as you can, get things in and out as fast as you can, and they forget to greet people. They forget to be taught, hey, man, Ali comes here every Tuesday at 7. Remember his name. Every couple times, just give him a free cup of coffee because he's here all the time, and I see that he has business meetings in the back table, and that those business meetings, he usually runs 4 people through, and they all buy. Every now and then we can give him one, right? If we forget that, the culture shifts. And it's small things that we can do every day that shape our culture. Like your Dat Grat video the other day, I loved when you interviewed, I think his name was Juan, the custodian of the building. Knowing Juan's name and being able to say, hey, good morning, Juan, is culture. It's your personal culture, right? Too many times we want to dismiss culture as an organizational thing, an institutional thing. We have personal culture. My personal culture, I want to know your name. My personal culture, if I'm grocery shopping and I see you, I'm going to say hello. I'm going to talk to the cashier, ask how their day is. And where I love doing this is one of my things, man, is if I'm at a place where I'm spending money and they don't greet me, I will greet them first. And I want to make them, and my hopes are that when I greet them first, it sparks a thought in them that, wait a second, this is my job, I should probably greet you. You're spending $350 on groceries here. I can at least take the time to say hello.
Yeah.
And if not, then maybe I don't spend my money there.
Yeah, I really like that term, personal culture. I don't really hear that a lot, but it's really something to keep in mind because it is kind of an all-encompassing summary of who you are, right? Back to being your authentic self. I'm definitely looking forward to this purposeful practice to kind of dive into a little bit more of my personal culture.
Yeah, think about it. We all have personal culture, right? And I know for a lot of this episode, we've talked about business and law enforcement and the way things change. But we all have personal cultures. It's how, again, at least for me, culture is how do you feel valued, important, special when you're around a business, a person, a group. So when I'm around, when I get the honor, and I think that's something we should really look at, is people shouldn't be privileged to be around you. They shouldn't be honored to be in your presence. The fact that somebody gives you their time, their most valuable commodity, means you should be honored. It means you should be privileged that somebody would spend this time with you. So how do I treat you? I'm going to say hello. I'm going to listen. I'm going to make eye contact. I'm not going to check my phone every 4 seconds when you're having a story with me, when you're sharing something with me. Personal culture. And we can all do that, right? We all get to create our personal culture. What we're going to accept, what we're going to tolerate, what we're not, how we're going to show up. Right? Think about this for On Purpose Podcast. This is episode 28. That means 7 months, every Thursday, you get an episode. Our brand culture is every Thursday, 7 o'clock, we show up. Reliability, consistency. You may like some episodes, you may not like some episodes. Something may resonate with you, it may not resonate. But we're showing up and we're continuing to provide value and to share. So now what does the culture create within the community? Well, now people feel empowered to share their culture with other people, to share their thoughts with other people, to say, okay, I want more in this life. Here's some things I'm going to work on, right? They're vulnerable. They're willing to be coached. You're creating culture all the time.
Yeah. And now personal culture is created from the cultures of the communities that you're involved in, right? The environment that is impacting you. So that's kind of a beautiful thing about the On Purpose community is that I come from different communities and cultures.
Yep.
You come from different communities and cultures, some similar, some different.
Yeah.
Cannabis industry, police industry, very different.
For
Trials, Toastmasters, different but similar in many ways too, to where our personal cultures have definitely been cultivated with a lot of the exposure in our communities. And then of course your circle of 5, your people, your parents, family, and all that. But culture is continuously, like you said, manifesting itself.
It's evolving.
It's continuously evolving, whether it's just ebb and flow. And the term personal culture is a new one for me that I'm definitely gonna give some thought, because I think that's also constantly flowing based on the cultures that you're allowing to enter your life.
Here's a great example, at least in my life. My wife's aunt was a very vibrant explorer type person. Like, my wife will tell stories about her childhood going back to Montana and going on crazy camping trips and racing on these motorcycles and doing all this crazy stuff out in the woods with her aunt and her uncle. That was her culture at the time. That was her personal culture: explore, expand, learn, challenge herself. Well, a couple years ago, we talked to her, and she's like, "Well, I don't need to leave my small town. I have everything I want here. Everything I need." Well, now over time, her culture shifted from learning and exploring to, "This is all I have. This is all I need." Right? So culture changes. Over your lifetime, culture is going to change. There's times in your life where you're going to be riskier. There's times in your life you're going to play it safer. But what should never change is the fact that you're aware of how are you presenting, how are you showing up, and what culture surrounds you. So I
Yeah.
like to think of it like personal culture. Here's how I think of it. Sometimes you talk to people and they're just like, "Man, your energy, like I can feel your energy. Oh, I want to be around you." That's your personal culture. It radiates from you. It's like a little bubble around you. And people might be like, "That's kind of silly. I don't understand." Listen now, here's where I would say we should all be able to relate. When you're in a bad mood and you're pissed off, does it take people long to feel that from you?
No.
They know. Oh shit, Ali's mad. When you go out and do dat grat, risk taking, vulnerable, being told no, you're out there. People feel that energy. Right? Like it is actually your personal culture is what surrounds you. How do you show up? We all have it, but we don't all pay attention to it. We all don't cultivate it to show up the way we think we're going to show up. And we may show up with the best intentions, but our mind frame's not focused on the people around us. Right? My personal culture is to coach you. And I want to empower you to be as successful as you could be. But in the back of my head, I'm showing up to sell you something or to take something from you or to just get you as a statistic so I can move to the next thing. Well, I may say this is what I'm doing, but my culture is different. Right? The energy I'm putting off, I'm taking, I'm not giving to you. So you got to be authentic with it, right? And you got to pay attention. Like, okay, this is my personal culture. I want people to feel valued. I want people to feel special. I want to give more than I take. So I'm mindful of it. So when I show up, I can do that consistently. And so can everybody else. But the first thing is you got to know what is it, how do you want your culture to be? How do you want people to feel around you? And when you create awareness with that, then you can perform.
No doubt. And you led me to an interesting thought now that we're talking about personal culture. That seems to be the first, the smallest unit of culture, right? Is just your personal culture. Then you bring your own culture to a small group and you contribute to the culture of that group.
Yep.
That group, whatever community it's in, contributes to the culture of the community. Now, on a bigger scale, right? My father's was born in Lebanon, so I've had the opportunity to go to Lebanon many times. And I remember the first time I went over there, I experienced the term culture shock of like, whoa, this is how these people live. That they live very differently. One thing that's even men, when you greet people, you shake hands. It's culture to kiss each other on the cheek. That's and a big influencer of the culture there is religion.
Yep.
Right. Even though there are people in wherever that have kind of their own personal cultures, but I'm thinking here of like, man, what type of impact would be needed to make a massive shift there? There's lots of a lot of the culture is very heavily influenced by religion, very, very disciplined culture. You hear the Islamic prayers going on, the Allahu Akbar resonating through the mountains 5 times a day. You have the women that are covered. But also in other areas, it's a different culture. Lebanon is a very unique country because it's 50% Christian, 50% Muslim.
Oh, wow.
So there's different pockets of communities that have these different cultures. But it's interesting to think like, wow, that personal culture is the foundational building block to impact other things. So what do you think? What do you think can influence the culture of nations? Because a culture that's so heavily based on religion in a nation, I'm seeing, or I'm guessing, would be really difficult to influence, to think any differently. However, nations have risen and fallen since the beginning of time.
Yeah, based on what? A shift in culture, right? Russia was communist for how long? And then what happened? people started wanting more for themselves. They started having a shift in culture, and it led to an uprising. So it's going to start with one person identifying it. And then, just like you said, then they create a group around them, and the group creates another group, and then it slowly expands. But it all starts with your personal culture. And I'll tell you, one of my big things is I don't want to be told how things are and the way things have to be done. I just don't like that. And my wife will tell you, I put, since I've been a little kid, if you tell me this is how you have to do it and this is the way it is, I'm going to push back, guaranteed. Because my culture, my personal culture is I want to find out for myself. I want to know why it has to be that way. Is there any room to operate? Can I do it differently? Can I do it better? Right? So like our culture here with the podcast, we come from different backgrounds, different walks of life. So part of our culture is agreeing to disagree, to learn from each other, to share with each other, right? To respect that others have different opinions. So to me, you can change the culture of countries. You can change the culture. We can change the culture of the world. If we want more love, we want more compassion, we want people to feel valued. Well, I can't do that. I won't make that happen if I don't love people and make people feel valued around me in my life, right? And that's, I think, where people drop the ball a lot is we say this stuff, but I don't practice it. And I'll tell you, for me, like, if you tell me you're going to do something, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. But then if I'm around you and you're not doing it, I'm done, because your culture is not what you said you were going to do. That was great. Everybody can say they're going to do all this stuff, but what did you actually do? Like for this, when we met, we were like, let's do this podcast. We're going to impact lives. This is fantastic. But if you'd have been late, not showed up, came in unprepared, well, yeah, you said it was going to be great. You said it was going to do all this stuff, but then your actions weren't backing it up. So that's what I want our listeners to think about as they go into their homework for this episode, in their practice for this episode, is identify what you want your culture to be, but then ask yourself truthfully, do my actions reflect that?
Yeah.
Because if they don't, your culture is your actions.
No doubt. Yeah. I don't know if you noticed, I haven't really spoken as much on this recording because this is going to be some good practice for me. I don't really think about what's my personal culture, right? What's my culture at home, right? What's the culture? I do think about it a little bit here in the office, but culture is definitely not something that I have front of mind. So I'm excited to talk about the practice. As you want to
Sure.
go ahead and get
Yeah,
on.
let's throw out some purposeful practice for our listeners.
Cool.
Is really take a moment and identify what is your personal culture. Right? What is your personal culture? And I love personal culture over corporate culture, over, political culture. I like starting at the smallest micro assessment, which is personal culture. How are you showing up? What is your personal culture? What do you stand for? How do you show up every day? How do you give to others?
Does that include the culture like in the home?
For sure.
Okay.
Right, there's a term out there. It's the critical parent. Right, critical parenting is, Trey, I want you to go out and be your best. I want you to go out and try hard. And then every time you make mistakes, all I do is I point out mistake. I'm that critical parent. Well, I may tell you go out and try hard, go take some risk in life, be all you can be, whatever. But if every time you make a mistake, all you hear about from me is mistakes, the culture in my house is don't make mistakes. So absolutely, it's your house, it's your parenting, it's your relationships, it's all of it. And that's why I love culture and why I'm hypersensitive and hyper aware of how I show up, is because that is my culture. What if I only meet you once in life? How I show up that day is how you're going to remember me for the rest of your life, or how you're not going to remember me for the rest of your life. It's my culture.
Yeah.
So identify what is your personal culture. And then let's identify small things you can do to either create change or impact that culture in the way that you want. So be honest. If you want an open house where your kids talk to you, where they come to you after making mistakes, make sure your practices are open for that. Make sure that your behaviors are allowing that. Same for your work. Same for when you meet strangers. What is my culture? And what changes do I need to make to ensure that I'm showing up in a way that aligns with what I said I wanted? And then as always, the next one, are these things creating positive change? Is your culture creating positive change? And if it's not, what do you need to change? And I know this can be kind of deep for people, and it's going to tie into a lot of other episodes, right? Your authentic self, your communities, but all of that is your culture. So really take inventory of that and look at that. So 3 things. What is your personal culture? What are small things you're doing that impact your culture? And is your culture creating positive change, or are there things you need to change to get there?
And that is the Purposeful Practice for episode 28. What is culture? Again, I'd like to just give my gratitude to the On Purpose community. We're really grateful to get your practice in. Submit that. Helps us. It helps you. And is an overall great practice just overall. And we also have our Purposeful Workshop coming up October 19th. We have already sold a few tickets to the limited seat. We have 20 available?
20. Yep, 20 spots only.
Yep, 20 spots available, just a little over a month away. So get on that. Shoot us an email if you need any information. It's on the Facebook page. We have the Eventbrite link as well.
Yeah, and the link's in the bio on our Instagram. So get there, register. It's a small cost for what you're going to get. I guarantee at the end of those 4 hours, you will think it was well worth your time and your small investment. And it's kind of the future of where we're going. Part of our personal culture is to share positivity, purposefulness, and to empower others to live a happy, purposeful life. Mm-hmm. So we're after it, right? And we're coming. The next step is these workshops in person, the follow-up, the accountability. We're just touching the tip of the iceberg, and we can't do it without all of you. We are blown away every week at the conversations people come up to us with, the fact that you're being recognized in different places as being on the podcast is so humbling.
It really is. It really is. And I can't wait for the workshop because myself and Jared, I know, we're both very in-person people, very physical people. We're excited to talk to you, to interact with you, to grab your shoulder, touch you, be in person, and really help each other develop to live our lives with more purpose and passion. So can't wait. October 19th, mark your calendar because you're definitely going to want to be there, and we want you to be there.
Yeah, get registered. And as always, team, remember, life is far too short to live any other way than on purpose. Thank you for being here. We'll see everybody next week.